Because it's super easy. If your relationship is feeling a little sideways or a little bit disconnected, it's really easy to put that on your partner and say, well, if she did this, if they did that, this would go much better. It's all their fault. We blame really easy. And part of that is we don't want to take responsibility. We
Right.
don't want to take ownership. The new version of that for me, and this is a work in progress. What am I doing? Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Grit Meets Growth podcast, where we bring you inspiration and insights focused on getting uncomfortable, making things happen, and creating a magnetic life. If you enjoy the messages you're hearing here, please leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes of the podcast. With that, let's get after it.
Well, howdy.
How's it going, man?
It's Saturday. We're
We don't
recording on a Saturday. Like, how weird is this, right?
ever get to record on Saturdays. This is it's different, man. It's good.
It's way different. It's even got me in a different mindset, right? Weekends, obviously we spend with our partners, with our spouses. Got me to thinking about relationships. And, a good time here, as we're reflecting upon the last year, putting plans in place for this year, 2024. I think relationships play a big part in that. And it's not just our spouses, our wives, our husbands. It's, our partnerships at work. If you're a business owner and your relationships with your partners there, in the workplace with your coworkers, I think what we're talking about today is going to impact and can impact all of that, and all of that has an impact on how we work hard to not repeat those past mistakes, if you will.
When you get into a conversation about relationships, especially this time of year, like you said, it's that time of year where we're thinking about a lot of things. We're setting a lot of goals, and sometimes those are work goals or financial goals or fitness goals, but including relationship goals in the conversation, if you don't do that, it's a miss. The relationships you have specifically with your spouse or your partner, I mean, those are a big deal, and they impact your progress in all those other areas if you really want to be truthful about it. So yeah. Where do you want to start on this? What's the first place you want to go when it comes to relationships today?
I'm going to open it up with a big one. And I think we both kind of talked about this topic as we were prepping for this, right? If a relationship isn't going right or the way that you want it to, where's the first place you look? Where's the first place you look, John?
Well, I'll break it into two pieces. The first place I used to look is at the other person, because it's super easy. If your relationship is feeling a little sideways or a little bit disconnected, it's really easy to put that on your partner and say, well, if she did this, if they did that, this would go much better. It's all their fault. We blame really easy. And part of that is we don't want to take responsibility.
Right.
We don't want to take ownership. The new version of that for me, and this is a work in progress. What am I doing? Like, I have to own my own results, and I have to take ownership over these things. What's my piece of it, and what can I work on personally? So how about you?
Yeah, I think relationships, where the friction happens in those is when growth is happening, and each side of that is growing at a different pace. And there are going to be those times where one is outpacing the other, and that can lead to some major frustration and major conflict. And I too have really turned that focus onto shining light on myself and evaluating, where am I at? Why isn't, just talking relationship in general, not necessarily with my spouse here, but why is this not working? Where's my frustration coming from? Is my frustration really with the way they're behaving, or is it because I've moved beyond that and that behavior is no longer acceptable for me? So that's not necessarily blaming the other person, but it's evaluating where am I in that overall growth, process. And guess what? There are going to be relationships that we outgrow. It just happens. It happens naturally. You hope that with your spouse that you don't ever have that happen, right? There's a different bond there. There's a different tie there that exists. At times, yeah, it breaks apart, right? People get divorced, they split up, whatever. But that takes a lot of work to keep those relationships together, right? And it takes work on both sides, right? This isn't a one-way street, it's a two-way street. But back to here's where my ADD is kicking in again. Telling you, it's been pretty bad this week. Yeah, looking in the mirror, man. First place for sure. What's going on? Where's my head at? What am I thinking, right? Where has my growth happened? Is this acceptable for me? If not, then how do I help change that? If it is something that I should accept that I'm not, why am I not accepting that, right? I guess those are some of the questions that I ask myself.
When you talk about some of that personal growth, and if people are growing at two different speeds, one of the things I heard recently is it's like a thermostat in your house, right? So like thermostat set to 70 degrees, everyone's comfortable at 70 degrees. You get used to it, right? You dress for it. You know what 70 degrees feels like. And when all of a sudden somebody kicks it up to 76 or drops it down to 64, whatever the thing is, when that temperature changes, it's a little uncomfortable at first. And there's this natural desire to get back to 70 because I'm used to 70. And when partners start to grow at a little bit different pace, it is going to be a little uncomfortable to get used to that new temperature. You have to resist the urge to just drop it back to 70 because 70 is what we're used to, and that's just good enough. And I think relationship wise, whether it's a marriage relationship, spouse, partner, dating, whatever, or even business relationships for that matter, good enough is something you really want to check. Like if I ask my wife, like, how's our relationship? And she says it's good, that's not a good answer. Like a hamburger should be good. I want the response to how's our relationship to be a little bit better than good. You know what I mean?
I'd argue a hamburger should be great, just like my relationship, but I get your point. It comes down to, really, should your happiness, your peace, your well-being really depend on somebody else making a change, right? It comes back to that, pointing fingers and pointing blame. I think if that's really what your relationships, if you evaluate them across the board that you're trying to do, then you're really putting energy and effort in the wrong place. You're giving power to the wrong thing. We shouldn't have relationships that are full of expectations or this emotional manipulation that you see happening in a lot of places. You hear it in conversation from other people. I've seen it in some of my relationships, right? That emotional manipulation piece is huge. Everybody's trying to angle, and it's those people that don't want to change or don't accept the change that they're making, and they're trying to put that blame onto you. I've seen that time and time again.
To loop around on that for a second, I think there's a lot of times where we look at our partner or our spouse and we're like, hey, that person's job is to make me happy. Like, no, your job is to make you happy. It's on you. Like your partner is there to be a partner, helpmate. Like they're there to be on your side, your biggest cheerleader, the person you go to when you need to vent about something or unpack something, somebody who will listen. All of those things, they're there to support you, but they're not there to make you happy. And I think like when you talk about expectations, I've had relationships where I thought that person was there to make me happy. And I've had relationships where I treated that person like a vending machine. Like, what are you going to give me? what do you have to give me? I was in the wrong spot. I wasn't thinking about what I could be giving them or how I was going to show up for them. It was all about what am I going to get for me? Because I'm inherently selfish. I've had to break myself of that. Um, and when I didn't feel like they were giving me what I wanted, now I get some resentment starting to build up. Now I'm pissed off about it. Like, why don't you just like give me everything I want? That's not a relationship. Like, that's like a store. Like, it's different, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's, those relationships should be a vehicle of support, right? Where both partners are aware of their emotions, of their intentions, and making the healthiest choices that they can together, right? But you each have to be kind of evaluating that same thing and hope that you're coming together, and being able to find some common ground. Are you always going to be on the same page, especially with your spouse? No, you're not. But how do you work through that? How do you work through that without creating a bunch of animosity and frustration and aggravation? Right? You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to give first, to your point early, just a minute ago, John. You have to be willing to give first. Give first before you ever expect anything in return, right? It's the same thing we talk about with the go-giver and all of that, right? You have to be willing to give first. The rest of it will come. But if we're sitting here being selfish and always want, it's going to be a pretty miserable place to live.
One of the other things that comes up when you bring up the go-giver, and it's in the book, but I've heard it a lot of other places as well, is you can't keep score.
Yeah.
I think keeping score and comparing, like, well, here's what I did. What are you going to do in return? If you're going to live in any relationship you have, personal, business, whatever that looks like, if you're going to live in that space and it's going to be based on keeping score and trying to have it be even up all the time, you're going to be miserable because there's going to be plenty of times where you're giving more than whoever's on the other side. And there's going to be plenty of times where you're giving less, where they're giving more to you. The second we start to keep score, it's a dangerous place to be because as much as we want to pat ourselves on the back and be like, yeah, I'm like over delivering here, you're going to hit a point where you're under delivering. Some season in your life is going to kick your butt and you're not going to be the one that's over delivering. And now all of a sudden keeping score is not going to play in your favor.
Yep. And I think it's true, right? It's a lot of the work that we have to do on ourselves, right? That comes back to doing the work on ourselves and understanding where we're at, what season we are in, what our value that we bring is today, right? And there are those days where you bring no value, right? You can't find the value that you need to bring. And you feel like you're in this dark place. Well, guess what? You're just being planted, right? You're being planted for the next phase of regrowth or growth, I should say. And yeah, being able to recognize those patterns, take advantage of it, right? When you are in that place of giving, give as much as you can. Give everywhere you can. I feel like I'm in that place now since the first of the year, right? Like I'm just running on high energy, feeling good, busy, focused, getting shit done kind of thing. But I'm not like that all the time. So when I am in a get shit done kind of mood, I got to make sure I'm getting shit done. And I think that's, the same thing when we talk about relationships, right? Give when you can give and give hard, give it all in those relationships, especially the most meaningful ones. Give it all. Because there's going to be points where you're going to need them to give to you.
Give it all too. I think like having crashed a marriage pretty hard first time around, give it all means give it all. Like we've talked about this in the past a little bit. My first marriage crashed because I had work on my plate. We were raising two young kids. We both had careers. we had a lot of stuff going on. And at the end of the day, we gave each other whatever crumbs were left over. So we weren't in that situation. We weren't giving it all. We were giving the leftovers. And I can tell you from experience, giving the leftovers doesn't work. People get hungry. It just is a bad way to have a relationship. And eventually you starve each other. And so giving it all means like, I'm going to give it all. When I can give it all, I'm going to give it all. I'm going all in on this because it's valuable to me. I think that's the other thing with relationships is it's really easy to take them for granted. Like they're always going to be there. This person's like stuck to me like glue and they're lucky to be around me. Well, not really. Like you're lucky to be in a relationship, not they're lucky to be around you. Like that perspective has to shift. And yeah.
Yeah, perspective is huge. Yeah, and I think too, like, got to be careful of smothering, right? You also don't, in hearing you say, those things, like smothering comes to mind, right? Yeah, I'm going to give it all, but you can't smother either, right? We still, even within our relationships, we still have to have our own things that make us happy outside of that relationship, right? I have to still be able to do the things that I want to do, right? Still nurture those friendships that I may have and outside of our marriage, outside of our relationship. But still support, right? The marriage. I need to be able to have and do those things, but still support the marriage, right? It's not like I can walk away from it 100%. It's effort, man. It all takes work, right? And we talk about that a lot, right? This process of growth, this process of tapping into our grit in order to grow takes work. It takes being uncomfortable. Yeah, everything in my marriage isn't roses and rainbows, right? We work at it though. And I'm blessed to have a spouse that is willing to work, right? That we accept each other's downfalls, right? That we accept that. And when the other person is ready to grow in those areas, that we help support that growth. If we're doing that, like, yeah, I think we can be together forever, right? And that's my hope. Like I never went into marriage thinking, divorce was even an option. My parents are, just celebrated 50 years together last year. They're a perfect model for that, a perfect role model, right? They still do their own things, but they also have the things that they do together and support each other and grow. They've been amazing role models in that.
There's a massive key in what you just said there is they both do their own things and we both have spouses by our side who give us room to do our own things.
Mm-hmm.
You get to take your bike trips. I do my Nepal trips. I mean, we both have a lot of outlets outside of our marriage that our spouses support. And the number of guys I hear in particular who are like, yeah, I used to love to hunt. I used to love to fish, but I don't get to do that anymore. That drives me nuts because
right.
that when we start to like smother something that our spouse loved to do, but we just don't give them time or we don't support that, it's like we're chipping away at part of them. And that's not healthy. The smothering piece, like you were talking about, it's not a healthy way to have a relationship.
Yeah. Why should parts of me have to die in order for that relationship to blossom? Like if that's the relationship that you're in, then I'm going to be blatant. I feel sorry for you. Because I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be that way and it shouldn't be that way.
Roll that into though, like you need to have conversations about what do you with your partner, what do you want out of this relationship? Like be smart about it instead of letting the resentment build up, instead of being pissed off because they won't let me do this or I don't understand them. It starts with having conversations and breaking down. You hit on this as we were prepping for this. We don't have the conversations and then we make assumptions. And a lot of those assumptions aren't true. And then we wonder why things aren't working. We're assuming things about our spouse or our partner that aren't reality.
Right. We make assumptions on what we think is going to make them happy. We make assumptions on, oh, shoot, I'm having a great time with my friends, but, I better get home because she's not going to be happy if I get home later. And when you get home and they're not even there, they're off doing their own thing and they don't really care because they've moved on with their day as well. Like, if you would communicate that stuff up front as to what's happening, nobody would be let down on that situation, right? The assumption, I've been guilty of making that assumption before. And then you get home and you're like, well, I could have stayed. Right. And then, Shannon gets home. She's like, what are you doing home? Right. It's those kind of things, right? And that's the simplest of examples. But I think to your point, John, I think it comes down to what about your relationship fulfills you. And I think can be a pretty deep question, right? There's a lot that's tied into that. And I think that question really comes with perspective. If we take it back to being always in a giving position and we think about what fulfills us, well, geez, that should be tied something to giving in that relationship, right? But what is that? And what is it for you? And I think that's something that's different for all of us, right? But that's an exercise, to really think about. What am I giving in that relationship that fulfills me?
Where you went with that, what am I giving in the relationship? I think the approach for a lot of people is, what am I getting?
Right.
What am I getting? That's what's going to fulfill me. And it's the wrong mindset to have in a relationship. And I'll go back to when you said your parents have been married 50 years. You have a conversation with your mom and dad and you ask them if it's been an easy 50 years. I guarantee they're going to say no.
Ups and downs, challenges.
Absolutely.
Right on.
It's not easy. I think we get coaxed into this, this honeymoon perspective. The honeymoon's going to last forever. It's going to be easy. Unicorns are going to pop up from behind trees. There's going to be rainbows around every corner. And this is going to be simple. And I'm going to get everything I want out of this. Nobody has conversations about how much work you're going to have to put into these relationships to make them grow, to make them strong, to build good foundations. None of this is easy. Like, if there's one thing I want to give to my kids, is they're at some point going to have relationships. Don't walk into it thinking it's easy. It's going to be hard work.
Right. And there are going to be arguments, and there have been arguments and disagreements, right? And yeah, times where we are not on the same page. And always trying to limit any of that argument in front of my kids. But, it's bound to happen. They're bound to overhear something. And, really, in those arguments, just trying to stay centered. Right. And again, not push the blame. Don't push the blame. Look internal.
And not only stay centered, but also not hit below the belt.
Right.
I think there's moments where we have to be really careful, and remember that once the word comes out of your mouth, you don't get it back. And there's things I've said that I regret. And some of them I really regret. Things have come out of my mouth that I should have held my tongue on and had a little bit more discipline and self-control in some of those arguments. I think arguments are a good thing. I think you can have really healthy arguments and you can have unhealthy arguments. And I think the healthy ones, there's this natural push and pull where you're challenging each other And you don't always have to agree. That's, I think, the other piece of this is you're not ever going to agree on everything. Get to a point where you're okay with that and pick your battles. But then if you're going to have the argument, do it with respect. Like, and respect and love, put that in the argument so that it's not low blows and jabs that don't belong in your house.
Right. So I saw this thing yesterday talking about it was from a couples therapist that noticed 7 patterns in couples who made it. The first is they had boundaries with family. They put the relationships first, had clear boundaries with family, didn't vent to them about issues or make decisions based on what their families wanted. They did what was best for their partnership together. So we're talking about extended family, right? Sometimes you have to, and I've been faced with this a number of times, and you have to make those decisions that are right for your immediate family, not what's right for the extended family. They were friends. They genuinely enjoyed spending time with each other. They were excited to come home and catch up after a long day. Friendship is the basis of their relationship. Think about that one for a second. And I think about that with my relationship, and I go, man, yeah, we've got a friendship. We're able to sit down and brief and talk about and have interest in hearing each other's stories of the day. Weekends, we jump on the motorcycle together and we go. And I love those times together.
You got to be along those lines. You got to be intentional to do things that you love to do together and not just get through the week at work and then spend the weekend cleaning the house and going to the grocery store. Like, you have to make room for fun. And I'm just going to throw this out to any guy out there that's listening to this right now. I think there are plenty of dudes out there who struggle to plan fun stuff in their relationships. And they just like, she'll figure it out and then she'll tell me where I need to be. And I've been there. Take some initiative. Like, plan some stuff.
Guess what? If you've been together for a while, she likes the same things you do. I'm here to tell you, I used to struggle with that same thing. But guess what? She enjoys going the same places I do. So it's really not that hard. But you have to get over yourself. And you have to get past this whole, oh, it's Valentine's and I need to do this big thing. Or it doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Just go have a drink at your favorite place. Share your energy. Take her to dinner to your favorite restaurant. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just go get tacos, whatever you like. Like, go do it. Like, right? It's really not that hard. But it took me a long time to realize that. Now, this one is one that we've talked about. They've been through hard times, really dark times. They've all been through really difficult periods where we're at a crossroads, and even had second thoughts, but they chose to stay together and work through it. This established trust. Now, that could be a potential breakup. That could be a lot of things, right? But the key in there is establishing trust. Establishing trust in those situations that you've supported each other, that you've been able to get through it together. And what you've developed and what you come out the other side with is that trust.
You have to go through the hard times to develop the resilience. And in those hard times, in those seasons where it's really challenging, you have to resist the thought that the grass is greener. There's always going to be moments where you're like, this would be easier if I didn't have to deal with this. And if you live your life looking for the easy path, you're never going to get what you want. Nothing that you want in life is at the end of the easy path, including the solid relationship you're trying to build.
Yeah, if you're trying to get away from being hard, easy just makes it harder.
100%.
Lean into the difficult and lean into the struggle. Here's the other one, right? Let each other be themselves. There was a base level of respect and admiration for each other rather than a desire to change each other. This freedom brought out the best parts of each of them.
If you,
Sometimes you got to do your own thing. And
I
you've got to
know,
give each other room to be able to do that. Right? We are still individuals. Even though we are in a relationship, in a marriage, we're still individuals.
and you are never going to change the person you're with. Like as much as we think I'm gonna go find Sheila or Billy and I'm gonna change them, they're not gonna change. If that's your goal is I'm gonna be with them, but in the process of me being able to be with them, they're gonna have to change a little bit. Good luck.
They had difficult conversations. They communicated regularly and were open to each other's perspectives. They didn't cope by avoiding or denying. Emotional regulation was present, so conversations rarely became explosions. Hard to do sometimes. You got to keep yourself in check.
But one of the things is if you're not having those hard conversations on the regular and you're not poking at things at a consistent pace, you don't talk about them, and you're basically packing a grenade. And eventually somebody's going to pull the pin and that thing's going to explode because you haven't dealt with anything. And then all of it's going to come out at the same time.
Guess what the next one is? They fought. They got on each other's nerves. They fought. They were frustrated with each other at times, but they knew how to navigate conflict, bounce back, and move forward. Like, isn't that the key, right? Yep. We can argue, we can fight, we can have disagreements, we can yell. But at some point, we've got to bring it back. Might not be immediate, but we've got to be able to bring it back. We've got to be able to navigate through that, to be able to bounce back, to forgive and move on because we know that we're moving forward. They made light of each other's quirks. I like this one. They appreciated it and acknowledged the quirks in each other. Even if they were at times annoying, they made light of them and were never hypercritical. Like I think about this with my spouse. I think about this with my friends. Like we all make fun of each other's quirks. And I think that's what brings us tighter and tighter together. Right. But when somebody calls out your quirk, like you kind of just have to embrace it and be like, yeah, okay, whatever. It's who I am. Because, in making light of it, you're not trying to change that quirk because you're not going to. That's who they are. Like that, in many cases, like that's the foundation of who they are. But we can chuckle and have a good laugh about it. None of us is perfect. And that is the 7 things, 7 patterns of people that have made it.
I'm gonna add number 8 to that. And I think it's you used the word, and I don't think it was necessarily part of the list, but you just used the word, and I think it's maybe one of the most important words in this whole conversation is forgive. Like you have to be able to in these relationships. You let people in close, there's going to be days where they piss you off. There's going to be days where they hurt you. There's going to be days where they cut and it's not going to feel good. And you have this opportunity to either throw that in your backpack and just keep carrying it with you forever and haul that crap around, or you can have the conversations you need to and forgive quickly, and not haul it around with you. And I think that's a lesson I'm trying to learn on a daily is like, how do I forgive fast?
Yeah.
There was an old guy I talked to. He's probably 85. He's on his second marriage. And I asked him one day, like, how does it work? Like, what makes it work well? And that was the one thing he said, forgive fast. Don't
Yeah.
hold on to stuff. So
Yeah. One of my grandparents had said it never, I think when we got married, never go to bed angry. Never go to bed angry. Have the conversation. At least be at a place where neither of you is angry.
which goes back to doing hard stuff because sometimes not going to bed angry is hard.
For sure.
Sometimes you're like, I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to be like, I'm going to bed angry. I'm not letting this go. Forgiveness, not going to bed angry. Sometimes that's the hardest piece, but you got to choose it and then you got to act on it.
Yeah, I have a tendency to move pretty fast. I move beyond things. Like I get over things fast. Especially as long as we can have the dialogue about it. Yeah, we can talk about how each of us is feeling in a situation. I can move beyond it pretty quick. But that's taken work to get to that point.
It is work. I still have moments where I can hold on to things and it maybe takes me a day or two to process and get loose from some of my demons in that arena. So but again, you got to choose it. Like even if it doesn't feel good, like I don't want to forgive. I don't want to let this go right now. You got to choose it. And that's everything that's on this list that we're talking about today is a choice. You're choosing how you show up. You're choosing how you think. You're choosing how you give. Relationships are all about choices and then acting on those choices and showing up as the best version of yourself for the person you're with. And again, you take this outside of a marriage, you take it outside of dating, and you bring it to work, you bring it to your friends. This hits every arena that we're in.
Yep. And I'll leave you with one thing. If there's ever one person you're going to blame, look in the mirror because that's where they are.
That's the key for the next couple of weeks. Every time something fires up and you're angry at somebody else or you think that they jabbed you or hurt you or whatever, slow down and look in the mirror over the next couple of weeks and look at that person that's looking back at you and ask yourself like, hey, what's my role? I go back to like I'm a guy who's been through a divorce, and it was really easy in the beginning to point fingers and be like, she should have done this, she should have done that. When I stepped back and got really aware, I had plenty of participation in how we got there. It's never one person. I had to own my stuff.
Yeah, think about even in your friendships, friendships that kind of just dissolve. I've had to explore that, pretty heavy here over the last year. And quite frankly, those people are still the same person. It's me that's changed. There's things in there that I no longer accept. But you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and go, yeah, that's me. And guess what? I'm okay with that because I'm growing in this situation. And I'm growing in an area and a direction that I want to grow. The universe operates in funny ways, man. If those relationships were strong at one point, chances are they'll come back around. And if they're not, then okay, you have to be comfortable with that, right? You have to be comfortable with your growth, right? I no longer want to hit the brakes to wait for other people and their growth pattern. Like I'm on my own path. Spend your energy. You only have so much energy to give. You got to spend it where it's most important.
But that points back to you get to choose. Choose where you're going to put the energy. Show up as best as you possibly can for the people around you, and invest the time and energy into these relationships. Because they're the ones that matter are going to matter for a long time. And they're not, like we said, they're not going to be easy. You're going to have to do some work. You're going to have to get uncomfortable. Like when we started the podcast, we grit, being able to get uncomfortable, a little bit of discipline. Those all show up in this conversation. They're all important. If you're going to have good relationships, you got to have all of those.
Absolutely. So spend the next 2 weeks and do some reflection. What's working? What's not? What do you need to change? So get out there, make it a great day, and get after it.
It's a good one, man.
Right on.
That wraps it up for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the Grit Meets Growth tribe. And thanks for growing along with us and being part of this journey together. If you know someone who needs to hear the conversation we had today, please share it. If you got something out of this conversation, please leave us a review. And finally, if you want to make sure you don't miss future episodes, just remember to subscribe. We're thankful for each and every one of you. And as my co-host and good friend Chris Cathers always says, make it a great day.